So this is the Sarasota County Advisory Committee who is eager to meet you. The way this is going to work is I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. You do have one committee member behind you. I was on a Zoom meeting like that I was on a commute meeting like that. And my colleagues, I was behind the candidate, and my colleague said, well, "You better shut your camera off because you look like Oz." But that's okay. He's here via Zoom, and he'll ask a question as well. So we'll ask you to introduce yourself and so on, and then each member has a microphone from them. They'll pass it along, and they'll ask you a question as well. We have about an hour and a half. They ask you to summarize at the end. And this is a wonderful group. They'll introduce themselves to you prior to asking you the question. And off we go. And we always like to start with the most important person in the district, the student.
All right, well, I'm Sebastian Gerstel. I'm a student at Ruby High School here.
No, wait, we're going to let him introduce first.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
My fault.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
So maybe 5 minutes?
Yeah, 5
Okay.
minutes or so.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever time you need.
Well, good morning, everyone. I feel like I want to stand up like a teacher and walk around the classroom, but I'll stay contained here. My name's Terry Connor. I am very humbled and honored to be here today. It is truly an honor to be considered a finalist for the Superintendent of Sarasota County. And give you a little bit of background about me. My roots are in Jacksonville, Florida. So I've been a Florida native my entire life. I was a product of Duval County Public School System, where I graduated from what was then Forest High School, what is now called Westside High School. Stayed local grown. I went to the University of North Florida, where I got my degree in middle grades education. But I will tell you how I got there was really because of the influence that I had of teachers throughout my K-12 experience that really just invested in me. I came from a very hardworking blue-collar family. My mom was a waitress. My dad was a construction worker. And they instilled in me the belief that hard work is how it happens and how you become successful, and to pursue all the opportunities that were available to me. Unfortunately, they didn't have the financial means really to support me to go to college, and really didn't understand, having not been in college themselves, how to really navigate that system. And if it were not for teachers that I had in my life and counselors, it's amazing what a single conversation can change the trajectory of someone's life. And I remember in my senior year having that conversation with one of my counselors, and I didn't really have a lot of direction beyond what I was going to do, right? And that really shaped the rest of the trajectory for me, and that conversation did. And so that really inspired me to want to become a teacher, because seeing the impact that you can have on a student outside of even the academics, just creating those relationships and having those conversations and seeing that impact inspired me. And I got my degree in middle grades education. I taught 7th and 8th grade science at Ocean Way Middle School, where I was a student. And the reason I went back to the school where I was a student, because I knew there were many students who were had the same circumstances that I had, that didn't understand what opportunities were out beyond them, beyond school. And so I've taken as my role as a teacher into becoming the actual principal of that school. And we did amazing work in just exposing kids to the opportunities, whether that be career and technical or college level course exposure, that just opened their minds and opportunity. And I went on to be a high school principal at a very challenging Title I school. We did some amazing work around improving graduation rates and really shifting a culture that was a pretty violent school when I got there. We had 50 arrests our very first year, and we were able to get that by the time I left down to 0 arrests. And so I was really excited about the work we did there, and we improved acceleration rates, kids getting exposure to those college level courses, which they had not in many, many years. That led me to an opportunity to be a secondary education chief in Clay County. So I oversaw the middle and the high schools in the district. And soon after that was quickly asked to oversee all of K-12 as the chief academic officer. and we did some great work in moving that district academically. That district was a pretty high-performing district at the time, and just needed to tie everything together and really be strategic around how we could continue to improve. One of the vulnerabilities, I believe, of a school district that is a high-performing district is complacency. And you get comfortable, and that's what we had to do in Clay, was just bring a sense of urgency, and we moved it from 20th to 8th. And then after that, the superintendent who was there at the time decided he wanted to apply for Hillsborough County Schools, and he was successful in becoming the superintendent there, and he recruited me to come over as the deputy superintendent and chief academic officer, where I currently serve now. And of course, we walked in on, I started on April 6, 2020, right when we shut everything down, right? So imagine a transition team, a new leadership coming into a school district and the challenges you have there. And then on top of that, you've got school closures and you can't meet with your principals for the first 6 months face-to-face. Everything was virtual. So we had a lot of challenges in that transition, but we kept a laser-like focus on improving student achievement because Hillsborough was in some dire straits with having the most persistently low-performing schools in the state of Florida, 39, and we just kept working hard. We put the right people on the bus. We kept the focus on instruction, and we were able to knock that down to 18 in just 2 years, so 21 off the list, and with the projection of 6 more off the list, or 6 more remaining, hopefully at the end of this year. So that's been the exciting work there, and not only that, we improved the academic ranking from 36 to 19th. What appeals to me about Sarasota is I see from this board and from the community a desire to be the best, to provide the best education for our students. And that means everyone, that's all students. And so that's the work that I've been accustomed to over the last few years. It's helping support the school districts that I've served in reaching that excellence. And I am excited about the opportunity to do that here. I am married, I have 2 children, one's 12, one's 14, so I got a middle school and a high schooler, and excited about the opportunity of them participating in Sarasota County Schools. So, thank you.
All right, so for real this time, I'm Sebastian. I'll be a junior next year. So Mr. Connor, on your resume, when you're the principal in Duval at Samuel Wolfson High School, you said that you designed and executed a strategic plan to enhance academic performance and address students' social emotional needs in a Title I setting. When I hear social emotion, I think of SEL, which is a very destructive program to students. I also then realize a conflict of interest within you, which is that your wife does work for McGraw-Hill, which is a large supporter of SEL. So how do you address those two conflicts of interests when you implement such a program and someone very close to you works in a company that heavily supports it as well?
Okay, great question. I'll address my wife. So she does currently work for McGraw-Hill. She is a national solutions architect that supports the digital instruction implementation for districts. And she really is focused on helping them support how at a district-wide level, at scale, you can help teachers in the classroom leverage their digital resources, such as math and reading programs. So she doesn't have direct involvement in SEL, but to go back to your question around that in particular, I do understand that SEL there's a lot of worries around that. And really, to just delineate and drill down to what I was particularly referencing in my experience at Wolfson, was just ensuring that students had some positive reinforcement. What I walked into was a very negative culture in that school. And so teachers did not have a lot of high expectations of students, and all students were not being treated fairly and equitably. And so what we did to shift that culture was to put in some positive behavior reinforcement mechanisms. So when students were doing the right thing, they were being acknowledged for that. Because we were acknowledging every negative behavior, that it created this very negative culture throughout the school. And then negativity reinforces more negativity and bad behavior. And so we were sending more students to alternative school than any other high school in that first year. And because we put those systems in place and we really got the buy-in from the teachers, we were able to have the least amount by the time I left, and the arrest went down from 50 to 0. And so while I know the word SEL is very controversial right now, I think in this particular aspect, it was really just making sure we were meeting the needs of students and recognizing them for their positive behaviors.
Well, I guess it's good morning still. Good morning. I'm Jennifer Cottrell. I'm a former parent of the district, but I'm still a mentor here with Riverview High School. I guess my question today is pretty similar than the last. There's a lot of, as anybody knows, our reading scores and our math scores, we have a lot of students that are below grade level. And there's been a lot of talk in our district and focus on preschool through 3rd grade and maybe even 5th grade in that elementary time to try to prevent those gaps from happening. But in the meantime, we've got students who are 6th grade to 12th grade who have been behind and continue to be behind. As a superintendent, if you came into Sarasota schools, what would you do to help those students who are already in the middle and high school, who are already several levels behind, to bring them back up to where they should be so that they can be successful when they graduate and walk out those doors?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important question because it feels like we put such an emphasis on early learning. We're forgetting the back end of that. And statistically, if a kid is not proficient by 3rd grade, they're going to struggle by the time they reach that graduation benchmark throughout. And so what are we doing in terms of that? One of the things we're doing is really focusing in on the Tier 1 instruction. What I have seen historically in the districts that I've served is that once a student is labeled lower quartile or labeled they have a reading deficiency, then we begin at that time to really alter the exposure to grade level work for students. They are not getting the consistent exposure, and I'm a big believer that consistency, ample reading opportunities, scaffolding that because obviously students going to need that because they have some gaps in their reading, but pushing and differentiating the complexity of that and stretching them towards that has to happen multiple times. Like you can't just say you're going to read this passage that's grade level once a week. You've got to get multiple exposures to that. But then to couple that with the right support for students. So if it's a comprehension issue, what scaffolds are we using for students to help with their comprehension? If it's a fluency issue, are we giving them the proper supports? So for me, it really comes down consistent exposure to a strong Tier 1 curriculum for all students, regardless what gaps they have, but then supporting them to be able to access that text, whatever their deficiencies may lie in. And that's going to come through some data dig. We're going to have to dig into the data to see where the students are struggling and then align the appropriate support to that and then get them there. I'm a big believer in strong Tier 1. Kids got to read a lot. The more you read, the stronger you get, and we stretch them until they reach grade level and beyond.
Hi there. I'm Teresa DeWitt. I'm a mental health counselor, and I have 7-year-old twins, will be 7, and they attended Sarasota County Schools year before last. So I wanted to use your words, drill down a little bit more on the CASEL and social emotional learning. So previously, or earlier this year, our governor made a public announcement that he felt that CASEL was trying to come in under the guise of social emotional learning and attempting to bring in CRT through the back door. Our education commissioner sent out a broad email to every school district in the state to send him a detailed list of any social emotional learning in the districts. So at this point, with my question is, with the ESSER funding, I need to clarify a little bit more from the last candidate. We received $68 million in the American Rescue Plan, which is a part of the ESSER funds. My question to you is that the majority of our school board has determined that social emotional learning is probably not the most conducive academically, nor is it a mental health program that can be used in that way. So what is your opinion of CASEL? And then also, what would be your exit strategy to continue to support the school board? And I guess the third point is we need a community awareness program to communicate to and educate our parents and our community on the dangers of castles. So I know that's a lot.
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
You could just expand on that.
Well, I want to be very transparent. I want to dig more into the castle and exactly where those pressure points are in terms of what is the rub there in terms of CRT, and look at that more deeply. I'm a big believer that we follow statute and we follow our state rules. So it's been very clear that we have passed legislation around in state rule around not teaching CRT in our schools, and that we want to make sure that we follow the law in its entirety. So I will be very adamant in whatever the statutes are that we follow those with fidelity. So in the case of, if you go back to this, did you mention something about ESSER dollars and funding?
Yes, the American Rescue Plan is a part of the ESSER funds.
Yep.
But that's where a lot of the SEL is coming through with the program.
Yeah. So in terms of just programming around, resiliency or SEL, whatever, the terminology, in terms of student well-being, you should never be more than 2 steps from what our main goal are. Our goal and our mission as an institution is to teach the academics. Like, that's the core of it. And then we got to make sure we're getting to the basics of what our core mission is. And if anything, it takes you 2 steps away from that. So what I mean by that, if you can't tell me how this particular supplemental program enhances the performance of academics for students, then we don't need to address that. We don't need to be involved in that. So, is it okay with students? We talk about how to have healthy behaviors in classrooms. How does that lend itself to the academic performance in the classroom? Should always be the main goal there. So I'm always going to go through the lens of our primary responsibility is to educate students. I think there is a place, because there are students who need additional supports beyond the academics, but that's not our responsibility. We should have community partners to help us with that work. And it shouldn't take us away from our core mission with the academic piece.
Hi, my name is Valerie Kammermeyer. I'm a parent in the district. I have an elementary student and a middle school student. My elementary student is a struggling reader, not reading on grade level. My middle school student is gifted in reading above grade level. So my question to you, and in light of your wife's experience here, how do you feel about iReady and other digital learning tools as opposed to learning with a teacher, which I feel they benefit more from instead of sitting in front of a computer? How do you feel about that? And would you continue using iReady and other digital learning tools in the district?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I believe that there's no program out there that replaces a high-quality teacher, and that's what we have to ensure that we have in front of every one of our students is a high-quality teacher. And that's what concerns me with our national shortage right now. I get really concerned about being able to deliver on our promise if we don't have the qualified staff in front of our students. So where I believe programs can fit into the equation is because typically a teacher's going to have 20 kids in a classroom, let's just say on average. We task a teacher with the responsibility of meeting the individual needs of students. That can be very, very taxing for a teacher. That's a difficult job to do. So I think there's multiple ways to help in that process to make it more efficient for teachers to use programs like iReady in a very balanced approach. I am not a proponent of students spending hours on end on a computer program. That's not going to move the needle. I mean, there's prime examples of that. So it would come through an instructional framework that our teachers understand, and most probably in Sarasota, having not visited the classrooms, we have our whole group lesson, and teachers are working with the entire population around Core 1 instruction. And then we move into what I call small group instruction. In that small group, teachers are pulling students and having individual mini lessons and working with students based on their individual need. Well, they can only do that for so many students, right? So let's say I'm working with 2, 3, or 4 students on a particular skill. I also am having students in a rotation model. Maybe one of those rotations is students doing their 10 minutes today on iReady, 20 minutes today on iReady, a part of that block, and then they're moving over to independent practice, and then they're moving over to teacher-led. So I use that as an example where you can leverage technology to individualize, because a program like iReady, and I'm very familiar with it, having used it in multiple districts, is that it does personalize based on the assessment that they're taking. So they get a path that is very specific to where some of their skill gaps are. So it helps to accelerate closing those gaps. So to answer your question, it's all about balance, and it's all about the teacher meeting the needs of individual students. And there's many ways. I'm just using one example that you can do that, but I am not a proponent of a program over a teacher ever.
Hello, my name is Medalia Glover, and I am a resident of Sarasota County, and I have 4 children, 3 who have already graduated from high school and 1 that's in 10th grade. And the question that I have for you is, I would like to know, how do you plan to support educators as they move forward in preparing historical curriculum that is inclusive, that will continue to represent the facts and not eliminate or exclude community members who have contributed to Sarasota County, Florida, and the whole entire United States? Can you give me maybe an idea or 2 of what you plan to do to help those educators continue to be factual with their teaching of history?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, we have to ensure that we adhere to the Florida standards. We are charged by the state of Florida to align our curriculum, to align our lessons, and to align all of those supplementals to those standards. So I think first and foremost is having our teachers feel very comfortable with those standards so that they understand what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. If you go out of bounds, you run the risk. And we're very specific in state rule about some of those risks. So it all goes back to that. I mean, it really simply does. And so I would say that we train our teachers, we train our administrators on the depth of the standards so they have a full knowledge of that. And then we begin to build, and the district could help support with building resources that are aligned to standards. So I used this example in the big interview that I came from. And I think this is much more intense than that one over there in the boardroom. Is that we build a floor, and that floor is for that novice teacher who comes in and maybe doesn't have an education degree, maybe working through alternative certification. They don't understand really a whole lot about all the effective teaching practices. And then it goes up from there, right? You get more experience, and then you have teachers that are master teachers that don't need what's down here on the floor because they know their stuff. We have to differentiate our resources for that. And we need to rely on the expertise of those teachers in the development of that. So they should be involved. There should be a lot of collaboration around what it is we're defining for those resources, and making sure that those that are at the floor level, our new teachers who don't know, stay within those bounds, right? And then as you become more comfortable and you understand, what, if you're going to add an additional resources, it better be aligned to the law. We've got to be careful about that. But we have mechanisms in place to check for that. So that could be through PLCs, all of those things. There's many mechanisms to put in place for that.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elvira Kulavik. I'm a chiropractic physician. I'm a parent of a senior. We've been in this county, we've been in Florida since she started 1st grade. Love the place, love the area, love the county, love what Sarasota has to offer. We have a very diverse student population, which I'm very proud of. How will you ensure that every single student, all of our students, are protected so they can learn?
Protected in safety.
Safety and their diversity.
Okay. Thank you. I'll start with the safety aspect. I don't know if I'm going to encroach on the police officers' questions here. So let me clarify, psychological safety or physical safety? Both. Okay, so we'll start with physical safety. So I'm a big believer too that we've got to have strong partnerships with our local law enforcement agencies so that the ability to information intelligence share between the two and the municipalities and the school police department, very important in terms of what goes on social media and tips that come in. So it's important to have a really strong connection to your agencies. There's a partnership there. There should be involved in creating those safety plans. There should knowing how we're going to have reunification and all of that in the event that we have to evacuate a school. Like I'm really big on those partnerships with our municipalities. A very clear understanding around the safety measures that we're required by law to have, perimeters, making sure we have hardening, single points of entry. Our teachers understand that doors remain locked. You know, we can't get lax and propping doors open. That our staffs are youth mental health first aid trained and that they understand what to do, what are the signs that may be leading a student, you know, to exhibit some behaviors and how to respond to that. Having at the district level a mobile response team in case there's an event at a school and we need to deploy extra support, I think is important. I'm used to that, at least in Hillsborough County. I'm not sure what structures are here. Those are really, really critical, but it comes down, those are more of the hardening and the physical aspects that need to take place. And then ensuring that we as a district have consistent policies that we apply fairly to every student. So that if this is the discipline infraction, here are the consequences, and then we within that apply that in a consistent manner from school to school, from person to person, and supporting our teachers with that. Because I am a believer that, you know, if a student breaks the code of conduct, there's got to be consequences. Those consequences are not arbitrary. They're outlined in our code of conduct. We apply them, and based on the progressive discipline, those things escalate as we can. But after the student serves that consequence, there needs to be a restorative practice there to bring that student back in the classroom and understand we're not going to hold it over your head forever. Like that, we're not about punishing kids just to punish kids and make them feel a certain way. But in terms of psychological safety, I think that comes through teachers creating and the schools creating a positive environment, a welcoming environment, that this is the way of work, this is how we interact with it. You know, we share what is acceptable behavior, and like I said in my original question, reinforcing those acceptable behaviors. And I know that's part of the safety aspect. Any more of that you're looking for from me, if you want to?
Do you feel that every single student in Sarasota County right now, diverse background, feels that? They're safe, protected in every aspect psychologically?
I would say, and this is a total, having not looked at any type of survey data, looked at any of that, I would venture to say we've got more work to do ensuring that every kid feels safe. That should continue to be our focus, is that every kid should feel safe and in our schools, and we need to be as proactive as we can to ensure that that happens.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
My name's Ron Cutsinger. I'm a Sarasota County Commissioner. Thank you. And something you said changed my questions. You said you went from 50 arrests down to 0. I'd be interested to know how you pulled that off. Maybe you can dive down, give us a little bit of background on it.
Yeah. So it goes back to the culture. So I think, first off, there may have been a predisposition to overreact when I first got there to certain situations, right? And so I think it comes through building consensus and building culture in your school and working through situations that otherwise may have caused a reaction to arrest versus in that case, I would say that there may have been some opportunities there where we may have been going straight for the arrest when we shouldn't have. So that was the first thing. Because I am a big believer that if a student commits a crime, an arrestable offense, then that's what we got to do. But I also think too that there may have been some behavior there that we were arresting for things that maybe it was a civil citation, maybe it was something that could have been handled a different way in that time. So that was one aspect. But the biggest thing overall comes down to building relationships with kids. I really truly believe when you make connections with kids and you begin to know who they are and you get to know their families and maybe in their situations, you can support them better, more effectively. And that's what we did. We took time to invest in kids. We took time to have conversations to get to know them so that they felt safer to come to us and hedge off issues that were potentially going to manifest themselves on campus. And I think that really changed for us, that we were able to get proactive in a lot of areas versus reactive. And I always think that just comes down to building strong relationships with kids, and then they help you in the process of changing the culture. It was difficult. Did every teacher in my campus want to just all of a sudden change their mind about kids? No, but they saw the shift. Some of them decided, hey, I'm going to get on board with this. I'm seeing evidence. Some may said, you know what, I'll find another school to go to, and that's okay. But in this school, this is the behaviors we want to see from adults, being clear about that, being clear about the expectations from students, being consistent, but doing it also in a very loving, positive way so that students wanted to do the right thing versus felt compelled to do the right thing.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Connor.
Good morning.
My name is Chris Morales. I'm the Deputy Chief of Police for the City of Northport. I'm a homegrown local here, grew up through the school system here. I have two boys that are in the school system right now. One's a sophomore and one's a fifth grade student. And my wife's also works for the school board. I'm going to go into a leadership question with you. Tell me a time when you had to make an unpopular decision or deliver an unpopular decision. How was it delivered and what was the outcome?
Yeah, thank you for your service, by the way. It seems like they're more and more lately. It seems you're making unpopular decisions. That comes with the territory and leadership. So I'll give you an example that I have used previously. I walked into Hillsborough County with a $150 million deficit that was discovered about 2 months into the transition. The CFO comes and says, listen, we're going to tell you something. So you can imagine the white coming across my face at that time. So we worked really hard, really quickly to try to mitigate that as quickly as possible. So we had to put in some controls, to say the least. We put in what we called a financial recovery plan, and that was freezing budgets, freezing travel, freezing hiring, reducing budgets where we could that were non-essential. A lot of things went into place. And then when we looked at the staffing allocation model, and that's how basically the ratios that you provide to schools, and you get this many teachers based on this many students and this many staff. We did an analysis of that, and that was a huge problem. Too many positions were over allocated, had gotten out of whack. So we had 40 administrators we had counted up that we were overstaffed. Now you gotta remember we have 250 schools in Hillsborough County. So 40 times let's just use an average of $90,000 to $100,000. That's $4 or $5 million just right there. Now, the unpopular decision was we were going to have to reduce that. And so you can imagine principals having a field day about that, very upset because they had become accustomed to utilizing those personnel in certain aspects, whether that be to handle discipline or athletics, whatever. They didn't feel that they were going to be able to accommodate reducing that and be able to do all the things they needed to do to effectively run their school. So what I did, we handled that was, first off, we've got to bring them in very much in a situation where we do a lot of principal advisory council meetings with the superintendent and cabinet staff, meeting very much in a format like this where we meet with principals and hear those concerns. So in this case, it was all about these particular allocations. And hearing that, I think, is a big part. You've got to listen. You can't just make decisions in isolations and not get feedback. You've got to listen to that. So providing opportunities to do that, I think using data objectively helps in the conversation, because in this case, what we did is we took the surrounding school districts that are like size to Hillsborough County, and we showed like what their models were, and data goes to a certain point, right? But the emotional aspect is that's just not reality. I can't do this. I can't make this work in my school. So showing empathy it wasn't like we were ignoring that. We knew that there were some challenges. So especially in some of our schools that had exhibited some behavior problems and had a lot of those, what we did is we took their feedback and we created what's called a climate and culture resource teacher, and we placed those at those high need schools in terms of discipline to help offset. And you say, well, how is that saving you money? Well, we could justify that on our Title IV grant, which is not your general fund. So while we were running a deficit of $150 million on our general fund, we had opportunity to at least support the schools that really demonstrated through data that they needed this climate culture resource teacher. That helped build credibility, right? Because now you're making an unpopular decision, you're trying everything, sharing data, doing all that, and then the credibility is built when you can take their feedback and incorporate it into your decision making. And that really was successful for us. And we've been able to operate ever since then. This was 3 years ago when we made that decision, and we've righted that, and it's working well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good morning, Mr. Connor.
Good morning.
I'm Kurt Hoffman. I'm the elected sheriff. I'm a Nova Southeastern alumni as well.
All
So,
right.
so you spent some time there. So a lot of these questions kind of dovetail into what I'm going to ask, whether it's security, budget, curriculum. In a district this large, and obviously it's smaller than where you work, I think you've got 24,000 employees or something like that. So I want to, and we need consistency in this district. And I think the community and the parents want to see that. What they see at one school, they want to be consistent at another school. So in terms of whether it is security or the budget allocations or the curriculum, how do you ensure when you develop that policy that it's everybody understands what the policy is and that it's being carried out consistently? We don't have these separate silos where things are being done differently. So how have you, obviously with a employee population that large, and I've only got 1,000 people, and sometimes turning that ship around takes a week, to get or longer. So I'd be interested in how you do that and maybe an example.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, and thank you for your service as well. I will say that shared accountability is the starting point. People have to understand that if we're going to move as a district, and I know people sometimes, and I did this as a principal, right? You care about what you're in charge of. So if I was the principal of the school, this is and that should be the case. But there's also a bigger picture. As a district, there should be consistency of resources. There should be consistency in our way of work. And the way that to answer the part of how do you get there, how do you ensure that, there has to be very systematic accountability built into that system. There are checkpoints, there's fidelity checks, there's, when it comes to curriculum, we call them our impact reviews to ensure that resources are consistent throughout. I'll give you an example of what, again, I use Hillsborough, that's my current role. When I arrived, I oversee 2 large divisions. One is academic services and one is the school administration. When I arrived there, you have a chief of schools and you have 13 regional superintendents under that. Each of those, when I arrived, were kind of the master of their schools, right? They were advocating for their resources. They were implementing initiatives within each one of those regions. That was unsupportable from academic services side. So if I'm all doing 13 different reading programs because I believe these are going to be the best fit for our schools, but I don't have any support mechanisms built into the system to help do that because I just don't have the capacity on academic services to be experts in 13 different reading programs, there's a disconnect there. So we had to revamp the way of work there. So we took those regions because they were actually K-12 regions, and we broke them up and we redefined the role of the regional superintendent, very similar to I think what we do in Sarasota, having an ED over elementary and ED over secondary. We did the same. So we had maybe 5 elementaries because the span of control You know, with a large district, you have 150 something elementary schools. And then there was consistency about instruction there. So what are the supports coming out of academic services for every one of those regions? So there was, the coaches knew what to expect, the coaches knew who to contact in academic services, and there was consistency across the board. I think when you want to move a district, you have to work in that fashion where there's consistent systems and then fidelity to that.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, Mr. Connor, Keith Mercier, insurance broker here locally, does commercial and employee benefits, been here a long time. So my question is, because you get several employers in the room, whenever a company is looking to relocate to an area called Sarasota, Florida, they look at the school district, right? They look at what is it, what's the grade of it, what's how sound is it, et cetera, you know, from the EDC perspective too. So I'm just curious to see what in your past, how have you engaged the business community to bring them closer? Because, you know, having great educated employees and trying to keep them here locally is a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I'll do 2 examples, and I'll try to do them quickly. I'll start with our CTE programs. So we just launched an initiative that's the 2 academies that I'm referring to here are going to be launching this year in the fall. So we went and partnered with the EDC to talk about what were the in-demand jobs that were coming in the next 10 years in the Hillsborough area. And of course, you can imagine healthcare and construction. We're blowing up too. I think you're having a lot of growth down here as well. And so we decided to help, in order to fulfill a community need, we decided to partner with Advent Health, Baycare Health, Tampa General Hospital on our academy. We were going to develop a specific academy, and it was a repurposing of one of our older buildings, so that helped in that aspect as well. And providing, you know, state-of-the-art technology, adopting wings of the school, and really supporting the students through a program, our career and technical program, to help them continue their education into healthcare so they get a leg up. And then also on the construction side, partnering with local construction companies and helping with all different aspects of the construction industry and providing state-of-the-art technology and helping them. There was even commitments from the day we did our press conference that when students finished, they were going to be able to enter in, you know, if they completed the program, they were given some job opportunities of starting around $80,000. And that was a great incentive for the kids that are interested in that. So I think, you know, finding a need within the community and partnering with local businesses is a way to engage. Another way, a little more simplified way we did that at the elementary is a lot of our business want to plug into our school district. They just don't know how to. They don't know exactly, where do I fit in? What do I do? I just don't want to give money to schools. Like I really want to have an active involvement in the schools. So what we came up with, and this was with our Education Foundation, is a CEOs in Schools program where we had 150 CEOs in the local area partner with each one of our elementary schools and spend a day in the school as a principal and see all the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? But it gave a connection to our schools. It also allowed them to see where they could potentially partner and plug in where they didn't understand that before, right? So that's been very successful, and there's been some very long-lasting partnerships that have developed out of that. But it also, too, as we get new CEOs that want to participate, we're able to bring in our new businesses so that they're connected and know how to really support our schools.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Connor, Paul Caragiulo, district parent. So, given your choice, would you rather be here or Osceola?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I would be confidently to tell you I want to be at Sarasota.
So, you were at Clay. You went to Hillsborough. My question is really about, without getting into the policy weeds about the scale of an organization. Surely you've had a chance to review materials and org charts and stuff like that. Can you just provide me with a little idea that you might have about where you see administration and staff with respect to FTEs as opposed to what's on the educational side? Do you think that the product mix is appropriate, or are there things that concern you, given that you're from, right now you're working in a substantially large organization?
That's a great question. Thank you. I would say that there is opportunity. The district is growing, and it seems like I think you've put on a couple thousand students here in the last year or so. I mean, I think I've read one website that said 44,000, and now it's up to 48,000. So that's a pretty substantial growth in terms of that. You have to be forward thinking in terms of your district support, because the district is in service of schools, and there are some certain aspects that the district has to help support schools with. And what I see is there is opportunity here, I think, in terms of some of the recommendations that have been brought forth around professional learning and having someone lead that work. Because what I've seen when I was in Clay, I felt like I was over everything. I was chief academic officer, but I was also supervising the principals and evaluating the principals, and then I had federal programs, and then I had all of these things that it really made it difficult to be an expert on things. Where in Clay or in Hillsborough, it's a little more job role specific and more manageable, so you can go deeper and you can support. So I think, to answer your question, there are opportunities. What that looks like, I don't have the specifics yet. I want to dive deep to see where we could expand. But I also know there has to be a balance, right? We can't be fat at the district level. That's not something that is appealing to anyone. And so being very cautious about how we can support at the district level in a more efficient manner by providing some additional allocations, I think it's going to be a good first step for the next superintendent to come in and take a look at that.
I appreciate you mentioning something about the relationship with administration and the principals specifically, because as I'm learning more about the system, it seems like that is an area that specifically warrants perhaps a little closer look and perhaps modulation about how that culture goes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Eric Robinson. I own a CPA firm. Piggybacking on that, there seems to be always a tug of people at the administration level. We know best. I developed the curriculum, one size fits all. And then you have the schools saying, somewhat like you saying, 12 different unique, what works at North County doesn't work in the South County. Mm-hmm. So how did you manage that dichotomy?
Yeah, thank you. So I am a proponent of autonomy. I do believe that schools need to, it's a balance, right? I think we have to be very clear in certain aspects what district processes need to be consistent across. Staffing a lot of times is that way, but where there is flexibility and autonomy is when you're looking at additional funding sources based on that school's demographics, for instance. Let me just use an example. So we have a base ratio student allocation model, right? Every school, you get this many kids, this is how many teachers you have, and that model's there. That is a standardized district process. Then there has to be opportunity for the principal to come to the table and talk about the specific needs of their school. And so I'm always accustomed to doing that, and then being creative around the funding sources so that you're not necessarily just the loudest person in the room gets resources. That's not the game. The game is justification through data. If you're getting additional resources like Title I, you can leverage those Title I funding for additional allocations. So there's a healthy conversation around that, and I think that's necessary, because if it's full autonomy, that's going to lead to fragmentation. That's going to lead to a lot of variance within the system. And that goes back to the issue of everyone's doing something different. But there has to be a balance to allow people to make certain decisions within a defined framework that I think is critical.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Katrina Ward. I'm a retired educator of Sarasota County Schools, 32 and a half years. Within that time period, I had the distinct pleasure of being a classroom teacher, guidance counselor, a district level counselor trainer, And I ended my career as the supervisor in charge of school choice. So I also have had 5 children to come through, and I have my little man coming through to first kindergarten in the fall. So I'm heavily vested in our district. So with that being said, I'm going to focus on diversity in education. And when I think about diversity in education, I think about the many different learning environments here in Sarasota County Public Schools. I think of the many different student populations that we serve, and their wide range of learning styles that they're using to acquire, to apply, and retain the information that they learn. So I also think about the families and the many different backgrounds and experiences that students and their families come to us with. There are so many factors evolved around diversity that sometimes there's a belief that a commitment to diversity conflicts with a commitment to excellence, excuse me. So that could mean people may think that we have to lower standards in order to achieve and accommodate achievement. I would like to know, as an educational leader, how would you describe the relationship between diversity and excellence? And I'd also like to know what kinds of leadership efforts you're going to use to encourage a commitment to excellence through diversity.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I think it's really important to understand we have to define, we do have to be clear about what it is we mean when we use terms like diversity or equity. Those obviously have some controversial around it, right? So we have to be very clear about that. I believe it's really just funding. It's the funding that you use. Well, I think we have to do this. We have to define that it's not taking away from one to give to another. I think that's important. We have a student base allocation that we're provided by the DOE. You know, let's just say it's $8,000 per student as a round number. Now, if we had a student who was gifted that needed additional resources to help provide those experiences for the gifted child, I think we would all be in favor of that, right? That we address gifted in a specific manner, and there's funding that comes from the state on top of the student-based allocation. The state actually funds more money for that, and we use those funds to support our gifted programs. Also, in terms of federal funds that we receive Title I funding that addresses students of poverty. We receive IDEA funds that addresses students with ESE needs. Title III addresses students of English language learners. So we just have to be clear with our public that we're not taking money away from one pot and putting it over here to support that, because then there's a belief that we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and there's inequities that are built into that. Our FEF formula is actually built with equity in mind. That's why we get additional funding for ESE and ELL students. So all of that is a real important thing to be clear with our constituents and our community about how that works. And then after you define that, then it's really the actions that you take. What supports are we going to need to meet the needs of our students? Let's say we have Title I students where there are some wraparound services that need to be provided. Let's say after school care, because families aren't able to transport their kids, or there's a need there. Food pantries that may be necessary. So you have opportunities to bring in wraparound services with community partnerships. Like, I think that's important as well. In terms of ESE, additional funding through IDEA to fund additional resource teachers and ESE paraprofessionals to help with our students. Those are necessary. They're above and beyond the basic, but they're absolutely necessary to meet the needs of all students. So I think just being clear about what we're doing, why we're doing it, helps people there. We got to remember, and my motto is, and I know it's overused and it's cliche at this point, but it truly is all means all. So we have to meet the needs of all, and that comes through being very clear about those expectations. Thanks.
Mr. Connor, Mr. Connor, my name is Dr. Gary Kompothicus. I'm a resident for 40 years here. I've got 6 children. Some of them are still in the school system. I found it very, first of all, I like all your answers so far, so you're winning points with me, but what does that mean? Getting back to the very interesting, getting back to the 50 arrests and now down to 0, you mentioned something about maybe we shouldn't have arrested those children. I think over the past so many years, it's like a crime to be a boy nowadays, okay? And growing up, when I was growing up, we used to get scraps and stuff like that. And the overwhelming, and you're coming from more of a Hillsborough liberal type to a conservative now. You know what you're here for. The other guy is gone. The whole world's turned upside down.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, do you think that we've been too hard on boys in the past 5 years or something, or just in general, people are oversensitized because of what happened in Parkland and all that? Because I have a personal experience with my child at 10 years old. It seems like they're like failing the child by like labeling them and going after these people for just minor little things. It's just really, and people that are hyperactive. Now you're crazy. Everybody's on Ritalin now. When I was growing up, like, what are you talking? I mean, it's just seems to have been getting carried away. It went from one extreme to another. I'm all for safety for kids. Someone hurts somebody or something like that, and I understand bullying and teasing a kid can have some psychological effects, and that has to be addressed. But you also go the other way, and then I just seen some stuff I didn't like around here. That's why I'm on this board right now.
Right.
I had to take a stand. What do you think that was going on back then when you came and got down to 0?
I'll go back to, it was a philosophy that we wanted to hammer the kid, right? If you did wrong, we were going to hammer you. We're going to throw the book, right? And I think, regardless of the context of the situation, it was just get them out. And it could be for the smallest thing, or it could be legitimate, right? So then it was really deciding what truly is legitimate and what's not legitimate, and kind of reassessing our practices around that. I think that's important. The culture there at Wolfson at one time was like flagship school of Duval County, right? And then over time, behavior issues had occurred, and the staff had been the same staff for 30 years. And so now they have to address the specific needs of students that they didn't have to when they first started. And so it was like the good old days, remember the good old days? No, that's not, this is the reality now. How do you address that? And I think most of them decided we were just going to hammer the kid. And so that's not the way to approach it. So there was kind of just a culture shift of how are we going to meet the needs of kids, and then using some of those strategies around positive behavior and building relationships with kids. I saw a difference not only in students, I saw a big difference in staff. Staff who were very, at one point, angry with me about the culture shift and what we were trying to achieve, who came on board, months or a year later, who were the biggest advocates. So I had a lot of proving myself to do, and it got rocky before it got better. But I think it was just the culture.
Mr. Connor, I'm the voice from behind you, if you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
All right, I appreciate your patience with one of us virtually participating. My name is Kelly Kirshner. I grew up in Sarasota, have 2 children, school system, and I'm board chair of a nonprofit organization, Unidos Now, that works on immigrant integration with our immigrant community, particularly in partnering with Sarasota and Manatee County schools. I guess I have just a situational question for you to maybe explore in your own leadership style, and maybe what Dr. K was just alluding to, and kind of an environment similar to the country that can also be fractious and split at points in time. And so 6 months into your job here that you've chosen Sarasota over Osceola, you discover you have a member of your cabinet that's not necessarily the most effective self-starting leader that you nor the district wants and needs. You have principals that are complaining about this individual, and you discover, unfortunately or fortunately, that this individual is friends with some of the members of our school board. Can you talk with us how you might handle your leadership style, a situation like that, who should be held accountable for the central office shortcomings, and then what your approach is towards developing your team of direct reports as it relates to professional development, executive coaching, etc.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. So yeah, that comes with its challenges, especially the part when you talk about relationships with people within the organization. But I've always operated under a very clear, like being very direct and being very clear about expectations is the best way to operate. So if I have a staff member, even a part of the cabinet member or somewhere near that, I'm going to handle that in a very professional, behind closed doors conversation first. I always kind of go through the coaching conversation lens as the first resort. Because maybe I wasn't clear about my expectations. Maybe it was something on my end. So I always want to approach opportunities for discussing staff performance through a coaching lens first and being clear about how can I help support you, and in many cases, that has been successful for me, but not all. And so in issues where the coaching conversation doesn't lend itself to redirection, or improvement, then we're going to move to the next step. I'm big about progressive, right? I'm not necessarily, unless it's something illegal or it's warranted, I'm not going to just cut you at the knees the first time. So in a progressive way, I would look at is what supports need to be established in a more formal manner. I may put professional development plans have been necessary in certain aspects, and establishing timelines around correction of behavior. And if things are corrected from that point, we move forward. If not, then we're going to then have a more serious conversation about whether this is the right fit for you. And then if that's the case, then we do that. Now, you bring in a variable that's very challenging with, like, relationships with board members can be very challenging. I operate with the belief, and I know that sometimes this is easier said than done, I handle the day-to-day operations of a school district. The board handles policy. They really should not be involved in the staff issues of the day-to-day. Sounds simple, I get it. I've worked with 20 board members since I've been at the district level. So, I mean, I'm not afraid to have those courageous conversations, and, hopefully I'm supported in the end by the board members on that. But you got to do the right thing by making sure you're not, first off, you're not cutting bait too quick. You're actually supporting people to do the right thing. If not, you got to take the step to do it. And was there another part of that question as well?
I think you've answered that.
Okay.
Asking your approach on the development of your team, use of executive coaching, and those things.
Yes, yeah. So we do have in our current cabinet, we engage in book studies, and sometimes we bring in. I'm a member of an organization called Chiefs for Change, and that's a very supportive network of superintendents across the nation that is just a great network to help us professionally grow and meet some of the challenges that are being presented that are current realities. And so through that organization too, there's a great network to lean on and to learn from. And I'm a believer in networking. I'm a believer in the latest evidence and using that to help shape our way of work. So I'm all about executive coaching as well. I think that's great. We even explored that. We didn't actually do it yet, but we've been exploring that in Hillsborough County about having executive coaching for our cabinet members. And I would be open to that.
Thanks very much.
Well, thank you. So now you have maybe 5 to 10 minutes to summarize, and maybe there's some things that the committee didn't ask you that you'd like them to know about you, and what you want to leave them with a lasting impression going forward.
Well, I'll say this: you guys definitely were the more intense group than the other group. That was for sure. You guys.
Their questions.
Yeah, yeah. I will address the elephant in the room there. You had talked about my wife. I know there's things on social media about that, so I'll do that. She was wrongfully targeted. She worked in Hillsborough County too as a regional superintendent and did amazing work. Amazing work. She was able to transform a lot of the failing schools under her leadership. Very proud of what she's done. But sometimes accountability creates issues with staff. And unfortunately, there was some accusations that were false, but warranted, obviously, that investigation. And of course, anytime those investigations have concluded that that was unfounded, it was unsubstantiated, and she, of course, they wrote an article about it, the Tampa Times did, because understandably, husband and wife couple, right? Two district leaders, that was newsworthy to that particular reporter. So I just want to be sure that that's clear, that that was an unfounded, unsubstantiated allegation. She's done amazing work. She actually decided to leave public education because she knew that I would be pursuing at some point a superintendency. And I just don't believe at that point, being the superintendent, that having your spouse be a part of the district is necessarily a good thing. So she made that conscious decision to move, and had a great opportunity, had for years actually been pursued by private industry to come work for them because she's been so successful in her work, and she made that decision, and really she sacrificed for me to pursue this. So just want to make that clear, because I know that kind of hangs out there. Other than that, I think you guys asked some very pointed questions, and I'm hoping to dig more as I learn more about Sarasota. I'm excited about this opportunity and really digging into some of these very, very substantial issues that you've brought up. And I said I've got 2 children that I plan to bring in this district, and just like I told the board, I will treat every student of Sarasota County like the 2 children that come home to my house every day, because every kid deserves the highest quality education that they can get. And that's what I've been dedicated my whole career to doing, and I've had success doing that. And I love the fact that Sarasota wants to be the best, because I'm competitive in nature as well. You know, I want to be the best, and this is a destination district in the state of Florida, and we can be the best, and we can get there. So I'm excited to lead that work. Thank you.
Thank you.